Imagine two people who look almost identical financially, same city, same age, same salary, and most importantly, the same amount of money saved. Ryan and Steve are both 32 years old. They each earn $80,000 a year, and after years of cutting unnecessary, on paper, they're in exactly the same financial position, but they have very different ideas about what they want their money to do. Ryan wants stability. He likes the idea of owning a place that belongs to him, a backyard he can change however he wants, a garage filled with tools, even if half of those tools are eventually used only once. Steve sees things differently. He values freedom. He doesn't know where he'll be living 5 years from now, and he doesn't want to make a decision today that forces him to stay somewhere for decades. Eventually, their preferences lead them down completely different. Ryan buys a house, Steve continues renting, and now we're going to follow both of them for the next 20 years. Because the interesting question isn't simply whether buying is better than renting. The real question is this: what happens to your wealth when you choose one path and consistently follow it for decades? Let's start with Ryan. After searching through countless listings, Ryan finds a three-bedroom house with two bathrooms, a small backyard, and a garage. The asking price is $350,000. Ryan decides to put 20% down, which means $70,000 immediately leaves his savings account. But buying a house doesn't stop at the down payment. There are inspections, lender fees, title expenses, prepaid taxes, insurance, and closing costs. Let's assume Ryan spends another $10,000 getting the purchase completed. That means his original $80,000 savings is now completely gone. He owns the house, but he has very little cash left. His mortgage is $280,000. At a 7% interest rate on a 30-year fixed mortgage, his principal and interest payment is roughly $1,863 per month. But the mortgage isn't his only expense. He also has property taxes, homeowner's insurance, and maintenance. Let's estimate those at another $790 per month combined. That puts Ryan's initial housing cost at approximately $2,650 every month. Now look at Steve. Steve finds a similar three-bedroom property nearby for $2,000 per month. He doesn't have property taxes. He doesn't pay for homeowner's insurance. And when the water heater decides it has lived a long enough life, he calls the landlord. That leaves Steve with roughly $650 more cash every month. And here's where the comparison becomes interesting. Steve decides not to spend that extra money. He invests it. He also invests the $80,000 that Ryan used for his down payment and closing costs. So Steve starts with $80,000 invested and continues adding the monthly difference between his rent and Ryan's ownership costs. At first, Steve appears to have the better deal. He lives in a comparable home, has more liquidity, and has a large investment portfolio working in the background. But Ryan has something Steve doesn't: equity. And this is where the debate usually becomes oversimplified. People say, rent is throwing money away because a mortgage builds equity. But that's only part of the story. During the early years of a mortgage, a large portion of each payment goes toward interest. In Ryan's first month, only a relatively small amount of his mortgage payment actually reduces the loan balance. The rest is the cost of borrowing. Then there are taxes, insurance, maintenance, repairs. All of those expenses provide housing, but they don't become equity. So calling every mortgage payment an investment isn't completely accurate. Now let's move forward 3 years. Ryan has made 36 mortgage payments. His loan balance has fallen from $280,000 to roughly $271,000. So he's paid down around $9,000 of principal. But suppose the house is appreciated at somewhere around 3% to 4% annually. That could put the property value somewhere around $382,000 to $394,000. Ryan could therefore have somewhere in the neighborhood of $110,000 to $120,000 in home equity. That's meaningful wealth. But Steve hasn't been sitting still. His original $80,000 has remained invested, and he's continued contributing the money he saves by renting. Assuming his investments perform well over time, his portfolio could be around the same general range as Ryan's equity after those first few years. And that's the first important lesson. There isn't an automatic winner in the first few years. Buying creates equity, renting creates flexibility, and allows the renter to invest elsewhere. Now let's move forward again. Because this is where time starts changing the equation, Ryan's mortgage payment is largely fixed. His principal and interest payment doesn't suddenly increase because the house becomes more expensive. But some of his other costs can rise, property taxes can increase, insurance can become more expensive, and maintenance becomes more important as the house gets older. Steve has the opposite problem. His rent isn't fixed forever. If rent increases by around 3% each year, that $2,000 monthly payment slowly becomes larger. After several years, the difference between Steve's rent and Ryan's mortgage payment becomes much smaller. Eventually, Steve could be paying considerably more for the same basic housing arrangement. But Steve has another advantage that Ryan doesn't. His initial $80,000 has been compounding for years. This is opportunity cost. Whenever you use $80,000 for a down payment, you're not just buying a house. You're also choosing not to invest that $80,000 somewhere else. That doesn't make buying wrong, it simply means the alternative needs to be considered. Now let's jump to year 10. Ryan is 42. If his house appreciates between 3% and 4% annually, the property could now be worth somewhere between roughly $470,000 and $518,000. His mortgage balance has also declined substantially. That could leave him with approximately $230,000 to $280,000 in home equity. He has also spent thousands of dollars over the decade maintaining the property. Some repairs improved the home, others simply prevented it from falling apart. That's the reality of ownership. You don't just pay for the privilege of owning the property, you pay to keep the property functioning. Steve's situation looks different. His original $80,000 has had 10 years to compound, and he has continued investing the difference between his housing costs and Ryan's. Depending on investment returns and rent increases, his portfolio could potentially be around the same range as Ryan's home equity, or even higher. But there's an important distinction. Steve's wealth is liquid. If he needs $20,000, he can sell part of his investment portfolio. Ryan can't sell 10% of his kitchen. He can't sell the upstairs bathroom. His wealth is tied to one physical property, and that creates both advantages and disadvantages. Now let's go all the way to year 20. Ryan and Steve are both 52. Ryan's house could potentially be worth somewhere between roughly $630,000 and $770,000, depending on appreciation. His remaining mortgage balance could be around $160,000. That means his home equity might fall somewhere around $470,000 to $610,000. Meanwhile, Steve's original $80,000 has had 2 decades to compound. At a hypothetical 10% annual return, that initial investment alone could grow dramatically. And remember, Steve also invested the monthly savings generated by renting. Under the assumptions in this example, his investment portfolio could potentially reach around $750,000. So Steve may finish the 20-year period with more financial assets. But there's a catch. His rent never disappeared. After 2 decades of 3% annual increases, that original $2,000 rent could be somewhere around $3,600 per month. Ryan, meanwhile, is approaching the end of his mortgage, and once the mortgage is completely paid off, his housing costs can fall dramatically, even though property taxes, insurance, and maintenance remain. So which person actually made the smarter decision? This is where the internet usually wants a simple answer: buy or rent. But personal finance doesn't work that way. The better answer depends on the assumptions. Ryan's strategy works particularly well if he stays in the house for a long time. Buying a home comes with significant transaction costs. If you buy today and sell 3 years later, you may have to pay thousands of dollars in commissions and other selling expenses. You also spent the early years making heavily interest-weighted mortgage payments. That's why buying generally becomes more attractive when you're confident you'll stay for many years, 7 years, 10 years, possibly longer. The longer you stay, the more time you have to spread those transaction costs across your ownership period. Steve's strategy has a completely different requirement. He has to invest. This sounds obvious, but it's the most important part of the entire comparison. If Steve rents for 20 years but spends every dollar he saves on restaurants, vacations, cars, gadgets, and lifestyle upgrades, then the mathematical advantage of renting disappears. The spreadsheet assumes Steve invests the difference, real life doesn't. A person might start with the intention of investing $650 every month. Then one month they buy a new phone. The next month there's a vacation, then a new car, then an emergency. Eventually, the investment contribution disappears. 20 years later, the person is still renting with very little invested wealth. That's one reason homeownership can be powerful. A mortgage creates a form of forced saving. Ryan doesn't wake up every month and ask himself whether he feels motivated enough to build equity. His mortgage payment happens automatically. Over time, the loan balance falls. That forced discipline can be extremely valuable, but buying has its own risks. Consider mobility. Imagine Ryan and Steve both receive incredible job offers in another state after 5 years. Steve can give notice, pack his belongings, and move. Ryan has a property to deal with. He could sell it, but selling takes time and costs money, or he could rent it out. But now he's managing a rental property from another city while paying for housing somewhere else, and there's concentration risk. Steve's investment portfolio can contain thousands of companies across different industries. Ryan owns one property, one neighborhood, one local housing market. If that area performs extremely well, Ryan benefits enormously, but if the local economy struggles, housing demand could weaken. Ryan can't diversify his house by selling 5% of the garage. Then there's liquidity. Steve's wealth can be accessed relatively easily. Ryan's home equity is valuable, but accessing it generally requires borrowing against the property, refinancing, or selling. So home equity is wealth, but it isn't the same thing as having cash available, and that's an important distinction. Now there's another factor people often ignore: lifestyle. Ryan may value having a permanent home. He might love renovating the kitchen. He might want a backyard. He might enjoy knowing that nobody can suddenly decide not to renew his lease. Those benefits have value even if they don't appear on a spreadsheet. Steve may value something completely different. He might want the freedom to move. He might enjoy investing. He might not want to spend his weekends fixing plumbing. Neither preference is financially irrational. Money isn't only about maximizing net worth. It's also about designing a life you actually want to live. So let's talk about one simple metric that can help compare buying and renting: the price-to-rent ratio. Take the price of the home and divide it by the annual rent for a similar property. Suppose the house costs $350,000 and a similar rental costs $2,000 per month. That's $24,000 per year in rent. Divide $350,000 by $24,000 and you get a ratio of roughly 14.6. That's relatively favorable for buying compared with a situation where the same home might cost $600,000 while renting a similar property costs only $2,000 per month. But this isn't a magic formula. Mortgage rates matter, taxes matter, insurance matters, maintenance matters, investment returns matter, expected appreciation matters, and your time horizon matters. That's why two people can look at the exact same city and reach completely different conclusions. One person might find buying attractive, another might find renting far more sensible, and both can be right. There's also a third option that people often forget. You can buy a home and continue investing. You don't have to choose one identity. You don't have to become the homeowner or the investor. You can own a home while contributing to retirement accounts. You can rent while building a large investment portfolio. The goal isn't to follow a rule. The goal is to understand what you're giving up with each decision. Ryan is trading liquidity and flexibility for stability, leverage, and control over his housing. Steve is trading housing certainty for flexibility, liquidity, and greater exposure to financial markets. Neither decision automatically makes someone wealthy. The behavior that follows the decision is what matters. If Ryan buys a home he can comfortably afford, stays there for decades, maintains it properly, and continues investing, he can build substantial wealth. If Steve rents a reasonably priced property, invests consistently, avoids lifestyle inflation, and stays disciplined during market crashes, he can also build substantial wealth. But if Ryan stretches himself to buy the biggest house the bank will approve, the equation changes. And if Steve keeps renting but spends all the difference, his strategy changes too. The real question isn't, is buying better than renting? It's, which strategy can I realistically stick with for the next 10 or 20 years? Because personal finance is rarely won by choosing the theoretically perfect option, it's won by choosing a good option and sticking with it. If you're likely to stay in one place for a decade or more, buying may make a lot of sense. If you're uncertain about where you'll live, value flexibility, or live in an extremely expensive housing market, renting may be the better choice. And if you rent, make sure the money you're saving actually gets invested. If you buy, make sure the house doesn't consume so much of your income that you have nothing left for investing, because that's ultimately what Ryan and Steve teach us. The biggest financial difference wasn't the house, it wasn't the rent, it wasn't even the investment returns, it was the decisions they made with the money left over. 20 years from now, the person with the highest net worth won't necessarily be the person who bought a house, and it won't necessarily be the person who rented. It will be the person who consistently turned their income into assets instead of constantly turning it into expenses. That's the real lesson. A house can be an asset, a stock portfolio can be an asset, but neither one magically creates wealth. Your habits do. So before you decide whether to buy or rent, ask yourself two questions. How long am I realistically going to stay? And if I rent, will I actually invest the difference? Those two answers may tell you more than any argument on the internet ever will. Because the smartest housing decision isn't the one that sounds best in a debate, it's the one that fits your life, your numbers, and your behavior. And 20 years later, that's what will determine where your money ends up. If you found value in this video, make sure to subscribe and turn on notifications so you don't miss future videos on personal finance, wealth building, and financial freedom. And if this message resonated with you, share it with someone who might need to hear it. Thank you for watching. See you on the next video.